My friends, life is not a riddle to be solved, but a reality to be lived. Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existential philosophy, warned us against the obsession of reducing life to formulas and neat solutions. We are not machines that must be fixed. We are living beings, overflowing with contradictions, passions, fears, and desires. Yet so many of us approach existence as if it were a puzzle. If only we could find the right answer, then we would finally be happy, secure, and free. But life does not work that way. The more we attempt to calculate every step to eliminate uncertainty, to force existence into an equation, the more we distance ourselves from its essence. Living is not about controlling every outcome. It is about entering into the unknown, embracing risk, and making choices even when certainty is impossible. Kierkegaard taught us that faith, courage, and authenticity arise precisely when we stop analyzing life as a problem and begin experiencing it as a journey. The tragedy is that many people never live at all. They plan, analyze, postpone, and hesitate, waiting for perfect clarity, but clarity never comes, and so they miss the raw, unpredictable beauty of existence. The truth is simple. Life cannot be solved because it is not a puzzle. It is an unfolding story, and the only way to honor it is to live it fully, with courage, with authenticity, with love. Life is not a problem, but a paradox. This is the heart of Kierkegaard's wisdom, and it is where most of us go astray. We are trained to think that if we just work hard enough, if we just read the right books, gather enough knowledge, or build enough certainty, we will finally arrive at the answer to life. But the truth is that life does not present itself as a question with one correct solution. Instead, it reveals itself as a paradox, contradictions woven into the fabric of existence that cannot be unraveled, only lived through. Everywhere you look, you find opposites standing side by side. To love deeply is to open yourself to the risk of heartbreak. To be free is to carry the weight of responsibility. To hope is to risk despair. To truly live is to know you will one day die. These are not flaws in the design of life. They are its essence. Kierkegaard insisted that trying to eliminate these contradictions is to miss what it means to exist. We want simple solutions, but reality offers us tension. We want clarity, but existence confronts us with uncertainty. We want peace, but true life requires us to face anxiety head-on. Why, then, do we struggle so much with this? Because the human mind longs for order. We do not like paradoxes. They feel threatening to our desire for control. We would rather turn life into a neat formula. If I do this, then I will be happy. If I avoid risk, I will be safe. If I work hard enough, I will earn love. But these formulas fail us. Happiness cannot be reduced to a checklist. Love cannot be forced into conditions. And safety can never be absolute. When we treat life as a solvable equation, we set ourselves up for despair, because life refuses to obey our calculations. The paradox of existence is not meant to torment us. It is meant to awaken us. It is the reminder that life is larger than reason, that existence is richer than logic, and that we are not meant to merely analyze our way through being alive. Kierkegaard saw that only when we embrace paradox do we begin to live authentically. To accept that joy will always carry the shadow of sorrow, that faith will always tremble with doubt, that freedom will always be bound to fear, this is what makes us fully human. It is in holding both sides of the paradox, without trying to dissolve one into the other, that we grow deeper in spirit. When you stop trying to solve life, the paradox stops being an enemy. It becomes a teacher. The presence of pain gives depth to joy. The awareness of death sharpens the beauty of life. The reality of despair pushes you to seek faith. This is why Kierkegaard could say that life is not to be solved, but lived. To live means to walk into the paradox, to feel its tension, and to allow that tension to shape you. The paradox is not the obstacle to living, it is the very path to it. When you treat life as a puzzle, you inevitably fall into the trap of overthinking, and overthinking is the great thief of action. The mind circles endlessly, weighing possibilities, imagining outcomes, rehearsing scenarios, but never daring to move. Kierkegaard saw this paralysis as one of the greatest dangers of modern existence. The individual who waits for certainty before choosing will never truly live, because certainty never comes. Life requires risk, but the overthinker demands guarantees. And so, while they plan and analyze, life passes them by. Overthinking is seductive because it feels like progress. When you sit and reflect, you imagine you are preparing for the future, gathering strength, protecting yourself from mistakes. Yet, reflection without action turns quickly into avoidance. You may think you are being cautious, but in reality, you are hiding from life. The endless what-ifs become chains, and every option seems dangerous because you are waiting for the impossible, a perfect solution that eliminates risk. But existence, as Kierkegaard reminds us, never grants such assurance. To live is to leap. The paradox of overthinking is that the more you analyze, the less you trust yourself. You begin to doubt your instincts, your desires, even your ability to choose at all. Every decision feels overwhelming because you imagine that the wrong choice will destroy you. But in truth, what destroys you is not making the wrong choice. It is making no choice at all. In refusing to act, you choose stagnation, and stagnation is a slow death of the spirit. The one who never risks never truly lives. Overthinking also feeds despair. The mind that circles endlessly around its doubts begins to see life not as an opportunity but as a trap. Every step forward looks like danger, every unknown like a threat. Instead of expanding, your world shrinks. You become a prisoner in your own head, terrified of the very freedom you were meant to embrace. Kierkegaard believed that despair often comes from this refusal to act, from turning away from life in fear and hiding behind thought. The only remedy is courage, choosing in spite of uncertainty. Action breaks the cycle of overthinking, because once you act, you discover that reality is not nearly as terrifying as imagination. Most fears live only in the mind. When confronted in reality, they dissolve or transform into challenges you can overcome. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith, the willingness to step into uncertainty not because you know the outcome, but because you know that not stepping at all is worse. Overthinking is the attempt to solve life before living it, but life refuses to be solved in advance. Its answers are revealed only after the leap, never before. When you act, you discover, you grow, you experience. When you hesitate forever, you discover nothing. The irony is that clarity often comes only after movement. You cannot think your way into living. You must live your way into understanding. Existence demands risk, and this is the lesson so many resist. Kierkegaard insisted that life cannot be lived in safety, because the very nature of existence is uncertainty. To be alive is to stand on shifting ground, where nothing is guaranteed, and every step forward contains the possibility of failure. Yet without stepping forward, without risk, we never move, never grow, never taste what it means to truly live. Risk is not an obstacle to life. It is the very condition of it. From the moment we are born, risk surrounds us. To love is to risk rejection. To trust is to risk betrayal. To hope is to risk disappointment. Even the simplest acts, beginning a conversation, taking a new job, pursuing a dream, contain within them the possibility of pain. And yet, it is precisely these risks that give life color and meaning. If we avoid them, we may protect ourselves from suffering, but we also shield ourselves from joy. The one who risks nothing lives behind invisible walls, safe but suffocated, breathing but not alive. Kierkegaard described life as a leap. This leap is not rational, not something that can be fully explained or calculated. It is the choice to move when the ground beneath you is uncertain, to commit to a path even when you do not know where it ends. The leap is terrifying because it strips us of illusions of control, but it is also liberating because it forces us to live authentically. When you leap, you claim responsibility for your existence. You stop waiting for life to provide perfect guarantees and instead create meaning through your action. Those who refuse to risk often fall into despair without even realizing it. Their lives become dominated by hesitation, avoidance, and fear. They may achieve stability, but they are haunted by a quiet emptiness. They ask themselves why life feels so flat, why joy is so fleeting, why they feel trapped even when nothing external is holding them back. The answer is simple. They have not risked themselves, and without risk, there can be no real reward. It is easy to imagine that playing safe is wisdom, but Kierkegaard warns us that true wisdom accepts risk as unavoidable. The attempt to eliminate risk is itself a form of despair because it denies the very condition of existence. We are finite creatures living in an uncertain world. Control is an illusion. The only real choice is whether we will embrace this uncertainty with courage or retreat from it in fear. Risk, however, does not mean recklessness. It is not about seeking danger for its own sake, but about daring to act in the face of uncertainty. It is about confessing love even though rejection is possible, pursuing your calling even though failure may come, standing by your convictions even if you are misunderstood. These risks do not guarantee success, but they guarantee life. And life, Kierkegaard reminds us, is not about guarantees. It is about authenticity. The paradox is that only through risk do we find freedom. When you leap, when you embrace the uncertainty of existence, you break free from the chains of fear and hesitation. You discover that even if you fall, you are still alive, still capable of rising again. To risk is to honor life itself, because life, in all its beauty and tragedy, can only be lived on the edge of the unknown. Authenticity comes from choice, not formulas. Kierkegaard believed that one of the greatest illusions we fall into is thinking that life can be lived by following a universal plan or a ready-made formula for happiness. We want rules, guarantees, step-by-step guides that promise meaning and fulfillment. But existence does not work that way. No book, no tradition, no system can give you a formula for how to live authentically, because your life is yours alone. To live authentically is to choose, to make decisions that are truly yours, even when they defy logic, tradition, or the expectations of others. When people live by formulas, they are spared the anxiety of choice, but at a cost, they lose themselves. They let society, family, or authority tell them who they are supposed to be. They take the well-traveled road, thinking it is safe, but in doing so, they sacrifice their individuality. Kierkegaard called this inauthentic existence, a life lived by imitation rather than by true decision. You may appear successful, you may fulfill every social role, but deep inside you feel hollow because the life you are living is not your own. Choice, however, is terrifying because it demands responsibility. When you choose, you cannot hide behind formulas or external authorities. You cannot say, "I did this because the system told me to." Instead, you must say, "I chose this path, and I will bear its consequences." That is the way to freedom. It forces you to stand alone before existence, without guarantees, without certainty, and decide. But this is also where authenticity is born. Only when you claim responsibility for your choices do you begin to live as your true self. This is why Kierkegaard emphasized that the individual must take the leap into choice. It is not about choosing correctly according to some external standard. It is about choosing sincerely out of your own deepest conviction. Even a wrong choice made authentically is more valuable than a right choice made out of conformity, because the authentic choice belongs to you. Through it, you grow, you learn, you shape your existence. The inauthentic life, on the other hand, may look safe, but it leaves you unchanged, a shadow of what you might have been. The tragedy of living by formulas is that you never encounter your own soul. You never discover what you truly believe, what you truly desire, or who you truly are. You simply leave out someone else's story, hoping it will fit you, but it never does. Authenticity demands risk, but it rewards you with selfhood. It is the difference between living and merely existing. So when Kierkegaard urges us to live authentically, he is not giving us a formula. He is telling us to abandon formulas altogether. He is calling us to the terrifying but liberating task of making our own choices, of shaping our lives with our own hands. In every decision, small or large, we are asked, will you live by imitation, or will you choose for yourself? To choose is to live, to refuse is to hide. Authenticity, then, is not something given. It is created, moment by moment, through the choices you dare to make. Faith means living without guarantees. Kierkegaard's entire philosophy circles around this truth, that life will never hand us certainty, and yet we must live, choose, and move forward anyway. Human beings crave stability. We want absolute assurances that our choices will succeed, that our relationships will last, that our beliefs are grounded in unshakable truth. But existence denies us such comfort. The world is uncertain, the future unpredictable, and no amount of reasoning can erase this. To live with faith, Kierkegaard taught, is not to eliminate uncertainty, but to embrace it, to step forward in trust, even when no guarantees are offered. Faith is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as blind belief, a refusal to question, a clinging to dogma. But for Kierkegaard, faith was the opposite. It was the highest form of courage. Faith begins where reason ends. It is the moment when you realize that logic, planning, and calculation cannot carry you any further, and yet you still choose to act, to believe, to commit. It is not the denial of doubt, but the willingness to live meaningfully alongside doubt. Faith is not certainty. It is choosing without certainty. Think of the great decisions of life. To love someone is an act of faith. You cannot guarantee that they will love you forever. To bring a child into the world is an act of faith. You cannot know what struggles or suffering they will face. To follow your calling, to create art, to take a stand for what you believe in, all of these require faith, because there is no way to prove beforehand that your path will succeed. If you wait for guarantees, you will wait forever. This is why Kierkegaard described faith as a leap. It is not a small, calculated step with safety nets. It is a leap into the unknown. The leap is frightening because it requires you to let go of control, to move forward without evidence. But it is also liberating because only in this leap do you encounter the fullness of existence. Without faith, life shrinks into endless hesitation, waiting for a certainty that never arrives. With faith, life opens into possibility, into freedom, into meaning. Faith also transforms how we experience suffering. If we expect life to be solved like a problem, suffering feels like proof that we have failed or that life is broken. But if we live with faith, suffering becomes part of the journey, a teacher, not an enemy. We stop demanding that existence be comfortable and instead accept that it is mysterious, unpredictable, and beyond our control. This acceptance is not resignation. It is trust. It is the ability to move forward even when the path is dark. Kierkegaard believed that faith was not something you possessed once and for all, but something you practiced every day. Every moment of risk, every decision made without certainty, every act of love in the face of vulnerability is faith in action. Faith does not erase fear, it walks through fear. It does not provide guarantees, it gives strength to live without them. In the end, faith is what makes life possible. Without it, we would remain trapped in endless reflection, paralyzed by doubt. With it, we step into the unknown, not because we know the outcome, but because living itself requires us to. Faith is the courage to say, I do not know, but I will live anyway. The obsession with control breeds despair, and nowhere is this clearer than in the way human beings cling to certainty as though it were the only foundation for peace. We convince ourselves that if we can just organize life correctly, secure the right job, maintain the perfect relationship, gather enough wealth, manage every detail, then we will finally be safe. But this desire for absolute control is a trap, because life refuses to be tamed. The more tightly you try to hold it, the more it slips through your grasp. Kierkegaard saw that despair often begins not in chaos, but in this very attempt to master chaos. Control promises security, but it delivers anxiety. When you try to control everything, you carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. Every outcome becomes your responsibility, every failure your fault. Even when things go well, you live with the gnawing fear that it could all collapse. Instead of resting in the present moment, you obsess over the future, constantly calculating and rehearsing scenarios. This endless vigilance drains the soul, and slowly, despair creeps in, not because life is cruel, but because you demanded of life what it could never give, certainty. Kierkegaard called despair the sickness unto death, not a physical illness but a spiritual condition, a refusal to live fully in the face of uncertainty. Control feeds this sickness because it turns existence into a battle you can never win. Life, by its nature, is unpredictable. You cannot control other people's hearts. You cannot control the timing of joy or the arrival of suffering. You cannot control when love begins or when it ends. The attempt to impose control over these mysteries only deepens despair, because it guarantees disappointment. The irony is that the obsession with control often leaves us less free. Instead of living openly, we become rigid, fearful, and closed off. We avoid risks because risks mean uncertainty. We avoid deep relationships because intimacy requires vulnerability. We avoid pursuing our true passions because success cannot be guaranteed. In trying to control life, we shrink it, and in shrinking it, we suffocate our own spirit. The result is not peace but emptiness, a carefully managed existence that never touches the fullness of what it means to be alive. The alternative is surrender, not in the sense of giving up on life, but in the sense of releasing the illusion of control. Kierkegaard taught that despair is overcome not by conquering existence, but by embracing it, by allowing yourself to be present in the uncertainty rather than fighting against it. This does not mean passivity. It means courage, the courage to act without guarantees, to love without certainty, to live without the security of total control. When you stop trying to force life into your grasp, you discover a paradoxical freedom. By accepting that you cannot control everything, you free yourself to engage with what you can. You stop being paralyzed by what might happen and begin participating in what is happening. You no longer measure life by how perfectly it fits your plans, but by how authentically you respond to its challenges and surprises. The obsession with control will always lead to despair because it demands an impossible perfection. But when you let go, when you live in trust instead of domination, despair gives way to possibility. Kierkegaard's wisdom is clear. Peace is not found in controlling life, but in daring to live it. To live is to experience, not to solve. This is perhaps the clearest way to summarize Kierkegaard's challenge to us. So many of us approach existence as though it were a riddle we are supposed to figure out. If I can just unlock the meaning of life, then I will finally be happy, free, and fulfilled. We reduce existence to a mental exercise, a problem set waiting for the right answer. But life is not something that can be solved like a mathematical equation. It is something to be entered into, embraced, and lived through. The meaning of life is not found in solving it, but in experiencing it. Experience is messy, unpredictable, and contradictory. It brings joy and sorrow, triumph and failure, love and loss. These are not mistakes or flaws in existence. They are its very essence. If you stand at a distance, endlessly analyzing and planning, you miss the depth of what it means to be alive. You cannot solve love. You must feel it. You cannot solve grief. You must endure it. You cannot solve beauty. You must witness it. The attempt to solve life distances you from its reality, while the willingness to experience life brings you closer to its truth. Kierkegaard argued that this obsession with solving life is a form of avoidance. By endlessly theorizing, you protect yourself from risk. If you treat existence like an abstract problem, you don't have to actually live it. You don't have to confess your love, take the leap, face your fears, or accept your vulnerability. Thinking feels safe, living feels dangerous, but in this safety lies despair, because without lived experience, you are cut off from the vitality of existence. When you embrace life as experience, you begin to live authentically. You stop waiting for perfect certainty before moving forward, and instead allow yourself to step into the unknown. You accept that mistakes will happen, that pain is inevitable, that contradictions will not disappear, and you live anyway. In doing so, you discover that meaning is not a pre-written solution waiting to be found, but something that emerges through living itself. Meaning is created in the act of experiencing. Think of a traveler who studies maps obsessively but never takes the journey. They know all the routes, all the destinations, all the possible detours, but they never see a sunset, never taste the air of a foreign place, never meet the people who would have changed their life. This is what happens when you try to solve life instead of living it. Knowledge without experience is empty. Reflection without engagement is hollow. Existence demands participation. Kierkegaard's call is radical. Stop asking for life to give you answers and start living the questions. Let your days be shaped not by the search for certainty, but by the courage to experience joy and pain, success and failure, clarity and confusion. These are not puzzles to escape, but experiences to inhabit. To live them fully is to live truthfully. In the end, the wisdom is simple but hard to accept. Life is not solved, it is lived. The task is not to conquer existence with reason, but to enter it with openness, courage, and faith. To live is to feel, to risk, to choose, to love, to suffer, to grow. It is not an answer to be reached, but an experience to be embraced.